Welcome to the House of Truth. Today, today we're going to talk about how to respond to a plague. When COVID-19 first struck, I talked about the COVID-19 response. We went in detail about how we should have done, but now we're looking at our series on health and healing. We're going to go into more detail by looking at our example the Bible gives us of a plague, and that is the plague of leprosy. Now, someone will be like, well, COVID-19's not in there, or whatever. But God, the point is the principles. We're supposed to not the letter of the law, but the spirit. The principles apply across the board. And we're looking at what the letter of the law says, and get the principles and see how now we can apply them to a plague, not just like COVID-19, but the flu or anything else like that, any kind of communicable disease that can spread among a population. That's exactly what biblical leprosy was. And we're going to start here in Leviticus 13, 1 through 4. And the Lord spoke unto Moses and Aaron, saying, the man shall have the skin of his flesh arising a scab or a bright spot, and it be in the skin of his flesh like the plague of leprosy. He should be brought unto Aaron the priest, and one of the sons of the priest. The priest shall look on the plague of the skin of the flesh. When the hair of the plague is turned white, and the hair in the plague is sight deep in the flesh of skin, is a plague of leprosy. And the priest shall look upon him and pronounce him unclean. And if the bright spot be white in the skin of the flesh, and sight not deeper in the skin, the hair thereof not be turned white, and the priest shall shut him up that has the plague 7 days. Okay, first of all, I'm going to explain about leprosy. Like the plague of leprosy, this is like COVID. Like there's very easy to COVID-19. Well, the term leprosy, the Hebrew word, escapes his own, but it doesn't just mean what people classically call leprosy, Hodgkin's disease, which now there's a 50-cent cure for. It's that and the number of related diseases. And the point is, like under the plague of leprosy. And here's the thing: you can have other conditions that may look like leprosy at the beginning, but maybe they're not. So the first thing we need to know is you can't just have anyone look at it. You can't go have your mama look at it or something. It's got to be the trained professional. In this case, Aaron the priest, and his son's the priest. And remember, the high priest had the Urim and Thummim that guided him. And today we have the Holy Spirit that guides us. But same sort of similar principle there. So, he's going to have some insight, some supernatural insight. So, and notice, if a man has in his skin, testing is mandatory at that point. If he has any symptoms at all, it's mandatory to ensure he's going to be positive or negative. So notice here that and it starts with a case where you can be certain right off the bat. So he's going to be testing positive. He's going to be pronounced unclean. So remember, we talked about unclean last week. Is associated with death and filth, and of course, ultimately, Hashatan, Satan. Well, it's also here associated with sickness, which of course could lead to death and filth, and often comes from filth. Sickness does. So someone's got one of these particular kind. This particular kind of thing is unclean, and we'll look at what that means in practical terms as we go along. But remember, if someone's unclean, they can't go into the temples. The first thing, they can't go in the courtyard. They can't go to the courtyard of the Israelites or the courtyard of the women. If you're a woman, a woman who's of Jewish ancestry or whatever. If you're married into a family, the men, they can go to the courts of the Israelites. The women go to the court, and everyone else is bound to the court of the Gentiles. Anyone going there, but we're talking about these other places where you got to be clean to go in. So it means you can't go any further the court of the Gentiles. Is one practical thing. And that's where this inspection would be occurring, of course, because you wouldn't want to bring them in there, declare them unclean, and now they've already violated that rule. So, but notice the next thing, if you don't got a positive test, if they haven't tested positive, but we're not sure, what do we do? You shut them up. That doesn't mean tell them to be quiet. It means quarantine him. So handling a plague so far, we've seen just from this one, involves if the person's symptomatic at all, they got to be tested by a professional who's trained to know, who's trained to know whether or not they have the plague. And if they're not, if it's not certain, they have to be quarantined for a week. Okay, let's continue on. In Leviticus 13, 5-8. And the plague shall look upon him on the 7th day, and behold, the plague in his sight be in his stay. The plague spread not in the skin. The priest shall shut him up 7 more days. And the priest shall look upon him again the 7th day, and behold, the plague be somewhat dark, and the plague spread not in the skin. The priest shall pronounce him clean. It is but a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab be spread much abroad in the skin, after he has seen the priest of the cleansing, he shall be seen of the priest again. And if the priest see that, behold, the scab spreads in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprosy. Again, remember, leprosy doesn't just mean Hodgkin's disease. It's a communicable skin disease. Well, it's beyond that. Disease of the flesh that can cause terrible damage. So he has this unclean. Now, unclean here means, in this context, come to the temple, or not be able to come to the temple, but it goes deeper than that. But it means they're clean from disease or unclean from disease. And notice again, he was quarantined again, once again quarantined. And the priest, the professional has to make a final examination here. But as again I mentioned, there's more than one type, there's more than one variation of leprosy, just like there's different variations of COVID-19. So that's only covering the most common variation, if you will. We're going to continue on and look at some of the others and how to handle those as well. When the plague of leprosy in the man, he shall be brought to the priest. The priest shall see him, behold, the rising be white in the skin, if turn the hair white, and there be raw, quick raw flesh in the rising. It is an old leprosy that's in the skin of his flesh. The priest shall pronounce him unclean and not shut him up, for he is unclean. Okay, so notice again, it's mandatory testing, okay, by a trained professional. In that mandatory testing, in this particular case, the symptoms are so obvious. I mean, are so certain he doesn't have to quarantine this guy first to see. It is certain, just like the very first case we looked at. He's unclean. So if he tests positive, a good test where you're certain, you don't need to do any more testing, or you don't need to do any quarantining between tests, for that matter. Okay. Now let's continue on in Leviticus. In Leviticus 13, we've been reading. We're going to continue on in verses 12 through 15. If a leprosy break out abroad in the skin, leprosy cover all the skin and it has the plague from his head even to his foot, wherever soever the priest looks. And the priest shall consider, and behold, the leprosy has covered all his flesh. He shall pronounce him clean as turned to plague. It is all turned white, he is clean. But when the raw flesh appears and he be clean, he shall be unclean. The priest shall see the raw flesh, pronounce him unclean, for the raw flesh is unclean, it is a leprosy. That part can be a smidgen confusing. It really shouldn't say the leprosy break abroad the skin, but if this whiteness appears all over the skin. And by turned white, it doesn't mean like Europeans. It means like styrofoam or paper, okay? And that was a symptom. But if he consistently, the priest just looks over him. This means it had this one of the varieties of leprosy, and now it's over. But just like if you get cut and it leaves a scar, it left the skin in a damaged state. And what the priest is really looking for here is see if there's any raw place appearing. Any place that looks raw and pussy and, and just isn't covered by the white. So that's the case. The leprosy is still in the guy. If he's just covered with white everywhere, it means he's cured. And notice that he's the priest to look everywhere on the man's body, his entire body, from the soles of his foot to the top of his head. So it's a very thorough test. We're continue on here in Leviticus 13, 16 through 20. If the raw flesh turn again, if he change to white, he shall come unto the priest. And the priest shall see him, and behold, if the plague be turned to white, and the priest shall pronounce him clean that has the plague, he is clean. The flesh also, which even the skin thereof was a boil and is healed. In the place of the boil, and in the place of the boil, there be a white rising, or a bright spot, white, somewhat reddish, and it be shown unto the priest. If when the priest sees it, behold, it be in sight lower in the skin, and the hair thereof be turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a plague of leprosy broken out of the boil. Okay, so now this guy had that raw flesh, remember, with some of the white. Now that part's turned white. The priest can look at him and examine him thoroughly. And he's going to test negative. He's going to test negative now at this point. And he's going to now therefore be clean and can go back about his business. But then you have this problem here where you had a boil before and the boil's healed. But where the boil was, there's a white rise of somewhat, kind of like a pimple here, as it's saying. Okay, but the problem is this one is there's like an indentation in the skin. It's sunk in the middle. That's like a reddish, and there's a white area there, and there's a hair turned white. So he's unclean. He doesn't have to do any more testing here. If that's the condition, he's tested positive on the first test, and we don't have to concern ourselves with the later test. He is positive for leprosy. We continue on here in Leviticus 13, 21 through 24. And if the priest look upon it, and behold, there be no white hairs therein, and it be not lower in the skin, but somewhat dark, the priest shall shut him up 7 days. And it spread much abroad in the skin. And if it spread much abroad in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a plague. And if the bright spot stay in his place, it spread not. There's a burning boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. If there be any flesh or in the skin where there's a hot burning, and the quick flesh that burns is a white bright spot, somewhat reddish or white. So, first of all, he's going to look and just see. And now look again. He's examining this, and there's no white hairs, but they're somewhat dark. Okay, and he's again quarantined again. And he's going to look at him again and see if it spread or not. If it didn't spread, he's fine. And he's clean. He just has a burning boil, which, well, if you're at a boil, they're somewhat painful. And he has a problem, but he's not got a contagious disease it's gonna get on other people and get them sick as well. Okay, so he doesn't, not saying he doesn't have a problem, but it's not that kind of a problem. But if it continues on, we're going to do some more. We're going to do some more testing. Leviticus 13. We're continue on Leviticus 13 in verses 25 through 28. Then the priest shall look upon, behold, the hair in the bright spot be turned white, inside deeper in the skin, is a leprosy broken out of burning. Therefore the priest shall pronounce him unclean. Is the plague of leprosy. But if the priest look upon it, and behold, there be no white hair in the bright spot, and it be no lower in the other skin, but somewhat dark, the priest shall shut him up 7 days. And the priest shall look upon the 7th day, and if it be spread broad in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a plague of leprosy. And if the bright spots stay in this place, spread on the skin, be somewhat dark, is a rising of burning, the priest shall pronounce him clean. Is an inflammation of the burning. So you got this case here with the burning. So now you're going to look again, and now he's going to look again, run another test, and if this test occurs, he's either going to come out negative. If he comes out positive for the plague, fine, then we're done. But if he doesn't come out positive, notice quarantine him again, and another test. And again, at this point, the tests are going to be positive or negative, depending on whether or not it spread and so on and so forth, or didn't spread. The only thing about being somewhat dark is now it's beginning to scab over and whatever, or it's so this bright spot's not as bright and it's dulling down and it's healing up basically. He's got inflammation, which we still use that word today, but he's not got something that other people can catch, is the main point here. Now we're going to continue on, and we're going to look at some other cases they look at in some places where perhaps someone may or may not be so easy to discern whether or not they have one of these classes, one of these varieties of leprosy there or not. One of these variations. If a man or woman have a plague upon the head or the beard, then the priest shall see the plague, and behold, if his sight deeper in the skin, and there be a yellow thin hair in it, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. Is his dry skull even a leprosy upon the head or beard? If the priest look upon the plague of the skull, and behold, it's not in sight deep in the skin, and there is no black hair in it, the priest shall shut him up that has the plague of skull 7 days. In the 7th day, the priest shall look upon the plague, and behold, if the skull spread not, and there be no yellow hair, and the skull be not in sight deep in the skin, he shall be shaven, and the skull shall he not shave. The priest shall shut him up that has the skull 7 days. 7 days more. Okay, so now the thing of a skull, it's like if someone got something that was got yellow and infected, and it's all yellow and dried up. Okay, and so we're looking. The problem is if it's sunken in to the skin. Now, if it's got this thin yellow hair, the person is tested positive. No need for further testing. But if they don't, notice again, we quarantine them and to see what happens. And also notice if there's no black hair. And we'll see about that in a minute here. Okay. So it's just in a state where you can't tell. So you quarantine them and you look and see after the quarantine if they test positive or not. Or negative, I could be outside. They still don't. Notice you're going to shave everything around that, but not there. So the priest, so it'd be easier to see what's going on, and as well, and we shall see. And he's going to be again quarantined another 7 days. So notice this person's been quarantined quite a bit so far. And if they're in this far case here. In Leviticus 13, 34 to 37, we continue. Chapter 13, I should say, verse 34 to 37, we continue. In the 7th day, the priest shall look upon the skull, and then behold, if the skull be not spread in the skin, nor be in the sight deeper than the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. He shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the skull spread much in the skin after his cleansing, the priest shall look upon him, and behold, if the skull be not spread in the skin, the priest shall not look for yellow hair. He is unclean. But if the skull be in his sight at a stay, and there is a black hair grown up therein, the skull is healed, he is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. So now at this point, after this point, the quarantining is over. When we're done quarantining the guy, the priest can now come with a definitive positive or negative. There's going to be a professional's going to have a negative, be able to get a definitive test. And notice the professional here, the priest in this case, had to do multiple tests over a period of time. It's not always as simple as you can get something you're one and done and just move on. So in the same true with COVID, those home tests sometimes get false negative or false positives. You need additional testing to prove it. Some cases, it was obvious, if it was positive, it was very obvious. But a lot of cases, sometimes it wasn't. So the thing to do is continue with the testing. It's the same ideal here. We're going to continue with the testing, but you get to the point where it's either yes or no, it's obvious. It's either positive or negative. In that case, and here's the black hair that was growing up before. So if there's a black hair grown in, then it's negative. But when there's neither black nor yellow, the priest had to wait and see what happens. If it's spread, even though it doesn't matter if there's yellow hair or not, the test is positive. They tested positive for leprosy. If it didn't spread and the black hair is present, they tested negative. And by this point, one of the two is going to happen. Okay. Now we're going to continue to look at some more cases of things, some more variations, or perhaps in cases where people might think there's a problem, a plague, and there's not. Someone has a plague and they don't. Leviticus 13, chapter 13 again, verses 38 through 41. If a man or woman have a skin in their flesh bright spots, even white bright spots, then the priest shall look and behold, if the bright spots in the flesh, their skin be darkish white, is a freckle spot that grows in the hair, grows in the skin, he is clean. And the man whose flesh has fallen off his head, he is bald, yet he is clean. He has his hair fallen from the part of his head towards his face, his forehead bald, yet he is clean. So now we see some conditions that people might have even had concerns about, because remember we talked about bright spots before, right? And white bright spots. But they're just a freckle. And, and if you have paler skin like Europeans, the freckle may appear the other way around, but some of the people with darker skin, the freckle will be lighter in color. Okay. Remember that white, and again, by white, we don't mean like European people have. We're talking like paper or styrofoam. Okay. When they see that, there may be a scare that they have this plague, but they don't. And people just go bald, and just the front part of their head, like the comedian Stephen Wright. He's young. Some people just bald in the front, even when they're young, and some are just get old and they go bald. Well, there's no plague here. They're not going bald because they got a plague, and it's not unlike COVID where there's all kinds of other things happens, and people would just try to think it was, oh my gosh, this thing happened to me. It's COVID. In fact, there's actually a disease that can actually make your hair fall out. But your hair falling out and you're going bald, my wife's telling me about that. Doesn't mean you have that disease either. So you have to give and if you have any doubt, like we did here, the priest shall look. Okay, the priest is looking to verify. If there's any doubt, the rule is get tested, because it's about you protecting everyone else. We're going to continue on here in Leviticus chapter 13 in verses 42 through 44. And if there be in the bald head or bald forehead a reddish white sore, is a leprosy sprung on his bald head or his bald forehead. Then the priest shall look upon it, and behold, if the rising of the sore be whitish red, his bald head or his bald forehead, as leprosy appears in the skin of the flesh, he is a leprous man, is unclean. The priest shall pronounce him utterly unclean. His plague is in his head. So notice the problem's not being bald or a bald forehead. But this thing is like we'd read about the skull to some degree. But notice because it's in a bald area, because he's bald there, you don't have to worry about shading things around it to get a good look or whatever. The priest can look right away. And again, this white rash is kind of like so he's got this thing kind of like a pimple. Notice there's a rising of the sore. He's got a sore, a reddish white sore. It's maybe perhaps kind of like a pimple or a boil It's on his forehead or his bald head. The guy's unclean. This can be transferred to some other person. We continue on Leviticus 13, 45 through 46. In the leopard in whom the plague is, his clothes shall be rent, and his head bare. He shall put a covering on his upper lip and cry, unclean, unclean. All the days when a plague shall be in him, he shall be defiled. He shall dwell alone without the camp, shall his habitation be. So now we get some more principles. All right. And remember, the rule is you're to act as if you have the plague until you're tested positive or tested negative in a certain test. A definitive test negative. So until you know, you're to cover your mouth, you're covering up upon his lip, upper lip. You're to wear a mask. And you're to yell, unclean, unclean. And that's people keep their distance. And you're to rip your clothes, it's just a sign of mourning, but also you're just making yourself obvious to the people when you're bearing your head and your head bare. Remember, this guy might be bald already, but you don't cover it up. You got that red. In this case, it's maybe ugly looking red and white red thing with a white center or whatever on it, and you don't cover it up. You leave it where people can see. And the distance people kept, by the way, we know some ancient records, but they ruled that was 2 cubits, which is about 6 feet. So the principles here is wear a mask, watch your distance, and remember, and you consider yourself positive to your proven negative. In a case like COVID, people could be asymptomatic. You have to test everybody, but until they're proven negative, you have to treat them all like they're positive, and everyone has to wear a mask and watch their distance. But notice what else happens after that. Now, what do you do with him once he's positive? Besides that, he was being quarantined in his house in the city, or the camp, in his tent in the camp. Now he has to get outside the camp and leave it. And this is one of the great failures we had in America with, in the world in general, with dealing with COVID-19. We follow these instructions in part. We've seen some of them. We quarantined. We tested people, but we didn't make everyone test who needed the test, and we relied on them to voluntarily tell us. You know, and this is the law of God. There's no, I'll get tested if I want to. It was mandatory testing. We didn't do that, but we did have testing by professionals. We did have laws about wearing a mask, and we took them. We ended them too soon. And what happened? We had a huge spike of 3 times the triple peak, 3 times the peak of the previous spike in this last January, because everyone decided to quit wearing their mask. Well, the instructions don't say quit wearing your mask. You only quit wearing your mask when only the people are tested negative and you have mandatory testing. Then you don't wear the mask. We didn't do that. But here's our greatest failure. We didn't take the people who tested positive and put them outside of our cities. What we should have done was put them in the mass units outside somewhere. You know, they're going to get medical care. It has to be outside the city. And instead, what we do, we put them in the middle of our cities, and it spread like wildfire. New York City, and here where I live in Tulsa, too, got to the point where they had some people die at certain points. They didn't have room for them. They didn't have room for the morgue. They were out of a place to put the dead bodies so they could bury them. Now they get creative, because we did not follow this instructions. We did not handle the plague the way the Bible said to handle it. We handled it in part, and in part helped. COVID, we had over 1 million dead from it. The Wu-Chu flu, though, some people wore masks, but they're only professionals. They didn't make everyone wear a mask. They quarantined some people, but it was kind of voluntary. In some places, people didn't quarantine for various reasons, which we'll talk about. They didn't have a test at all for the Spanish flu. I'm sorry, my grandma always called it the wushu flu. And if we had the same percentage of people die in America today that died from it, we'd had 21 million dead. So partially doing what God said here about how to handle a plague gave us partial benefit. Okay, but we got our numbers dead. Our numbers dead could have been in the hundreds if we'd followed all the instructions. And we're not even done looking at the instructions. We're gonna look at the rest of them as we go along now. We're going to continue on here in Leviticus 13. Leviticus 13, chapter verses 47 through 51. The garment also that the plague of leprosy is in, whether it be a woolen garment or a linen garment, whether it be a warp or a woof of linen or of woolen, whether in the skin, in a skin or anything made of skin. If the plague be greenish or reddish in the garment or in the skin, either in a warp or woof, and anything of skin or anything of skin, is a plague of leprosy and should be showed unto the priest. And the priest shall look upon the plague and shut it up that has the plague 7 days. He shall look upon the plague 7 days, in the 7th day. If the plague be spread upon the garment, either the warp or in the woof, or the skin, when he worked as made of a skin, the plague there is a spreading by leprosy, it is unclean. Okay, so I want you now a warp, in a woof rhymes with roof. Okay, those are just clothing articles, and the point is, particularly the ones that are touching near your skin. So you got. And the skin, where some of the skin, it means an animal skin, perhaps an outer garment, as well. So you got to look at your clothing as well. In this particular case, you could see it. Now, you can actually, there was, I said, in this case, there'd be something you could see in it. And notice again what you do. You take it to the religious professional. You don't handle, the trained professional. Now, the religious from the priest here, you don't try to handle it yourself. And notice how the garment gets quarantined now, just like a person did for 7 days. They put in some sort of airtight box container by itself, perhaps a metal box, and close it up. And they're seeing what? At the end of that, they're checking to see if it's spread or not. And if it's spread, it is unclean. Because again, now remember, this was given about over 3,500 years ago. People didn't know about germs, but God did. Now the germs are in the garment, and what's the problem? Someone puts the garment on, they're going to get the disease. Well, sometimes people share. Sometimes people borrow clothes from each other, or whatever, and then multiple people can get the disease. So as we know today, again, God knew about germs before germ theory was ever developed. You're going to do this. So it's not just about the person being unclean. It's also about things like we talked about before. Not unlike the unclean animal, a dead body falling in a pot, a clean pot with water, or whatever, and ruining the pot because of the porous nature of it. Can also have the things they touch can also become unclean and have the plague in them, which can transfer to people. All right, we're going to continue on with what to do about what should we do if we find out it's unclean, and what we do if it's just maybe not certain at this point. He shall therefore burn the garment, that garment, or woof, in woolen or in linen, or anything of skin wherein the plague is. For as a spreading leprosy, it shall be burned in the fire. If the priest look, and behold, the plague be not spread in the garment, neither the warp or the woof, or in anything of skin, the priest shall command that they wash the thing where the plague is. He shall shut it up 7 days more. And the priest shall look on that plague after his wash. Behold, the plague has not changed its color, the plague is not spread, it is unclean. They shall burn it with fire. It is fret inward, whether it be bare within or without. So if we're positive, it's got the plague, you burn it in fire. Why? Bacteria cannot survive fire. Nothing can. Okay? You're gonna destroy it completely. Now, if the priest look and he's not sure, what? You wash it. He's going to wash it. See if it'll wash out. Maybe it's not leprosy at all. Maybe it's just some sort of like not mold. That's what I was thinking of. Like algae or something. Something like that. Something that's just going to be washed out. And he's going to put it in there. And now he's going to be quarantined again, just like the person. Sometimes they're quarantined twice. Now notice if it still looks the same, even though it's not spread, if it hadn't changed at all after washing, it's unclean. It's now tested positive, and again, burn it with fire, destroy the root cause, so it didn't spread to people. We're going to continue on here with Leviticus 13, verses 56 through 59. And if the priest look and behold, the priest be somewhat dark, the plague be somewhat dark after the washing of it, they shall rend it out of the garment of skin, or out of the skin, or out of the warp, or out of the woof. And if it appear in the garment, either in the warp or the woof, or anything of skin, it is a spreading plague. You shall burn that therein the plague with fire. And the garment, either warp or woof, or anything of skin can be, which you shall wash, the plague be departed from them, then they shall be washed the second time, shall be clean. This is the law of the plague of leprosy in the garment of wool and their linen, either in the warp, or the woof, or anything of skin, to pronounce it clean or to pronounce it unclean. So notice if it's dark, and what it means by rend out, it means it's going to cut out the area with the problem. And the reason some might think, well, maybe their clothing's cheap or whatever. But when I grew up, we had patches often on the knees of our jeans because that's where they worn out, fastest, because for various reasons, and because clothing was expensive. And when you're talking about people when they back in the day before manufacturing, it may take you 3 or 4 days to make a piece of clothing. So if you can save the clothing by just getting rid of the bad part, but that's great. But notice if he cuts it out and it still appears there, then it's throughout the whole garment, where you can see it or not, you got to destroy it. But if it doesn't appear, the rest of it, you got the bad part out of it, hadn't got to the whole thing, then you can wash it again, it's fine. So it's not just about the people being unclean, as I say, being tested for positive or negative. It's also about things that can carry it, like things that can carry it, like their clothing as well. But it doesn't end there. We're going to continue on looking, as we shall see. So we continue on here in Leviticus 14, in verses 34 through 37. If you come to the land of Canaan, which I give you for a possession, and I put the plague of leprosy in a house of the land of your possession, he that owns the house shall come and tell the priest, saying, it seems to me there's as it were, a plague in the house. And the priest shall command they empty the house before the priest go in to see the plague, that all that is in the house be not be made unclean. And afterwards the priest shall go in and see the house. He shall look on the plague, and behold, the plague be in the walls of the house with yellow streaks, or greenish, or reddish, which in sight are lower than the wall. So I want you to notice here. Now, first I want you to notice, if I put the plague of leprosy in the house of possession. Now, if God does this, it's not necessarily because he's putting judgment on the guy whose house he put this in. He could be testing the community at large to see if they'll obey him or not, and I'll explain that in a minute, okay? We'll see that, as we'll see in a minute. But I do want you to notice that, again, God, no disease come upon us unless the Lord allow it or command it. And so in this case, God's commanding it, and it may be judgment on the guy, but it could also be a test of the community, because God will allow people to be tested to see if they obey him or not. So first of all, the first person being tested is the owner of the house. I mean, the thought that your house has a plague in it is really problematic. So first thing I do, they got to take all your belongings out of the house. And why? That's so if this is in there, they don't become infected, and you have to destroy. And then we saw the clothing. You have to burn it with fire. Okay, you have to destroy it. Also, because the priest can now thoroughly inspect the house if there's no furniture or anything in it. I mean, nothing on the walls, nothing. Okay. And he's and he's again the trained professional who's doing the testing here. He didn't, he just get some guy who read a book, or back in the current days, watch the YouTube video. It's a trained professional, okay, who's seen this, and he's looking for the signs. Now we're going to continue on with what happens if he sees them. Leviticus 14:38-41. Then the priest shall go out of the house of the door, and shall shut the house 7 days. And the priest shall come again the 7th day and look, and behold, the plague is spread in the walls of the house. And the priest shall command that they take away the stones in which the plague is. They shall cast him into an unclean place without the city. He shall cause the house to be scraped round about, and they shall pour out the dust they scrape off without the city into an unclean place. Okay, so when he looked, there's something that looks like it could be leprosy. Now, so he's gonna quarantine the house again, and the test is, did it spread? And if it did, notice what he's gonna do. He's gonna try to, like we tried to save the garment, we're gonna try to save the house. Okay, so he's gonna take away all the stones where they can see the plague is at. And they're going to toss them out in an unclean place without the city. That's like a dump, right? Like the city dump, all right? And he's going to cause this house to be scraped. So, they had plaster over their stones. We had this when I lived in Greece. Everything had plaster. But not, in our case, like I got sheetrock or whatever. They would scrape off the paint, whatever, okay? And they're going to throw that away as well. Again, trying to see if the house can be saved or not. So, notice all this inconvenience. This is not just for the homeowner, but for the priest as well. The priest has to be obedient, is tested for his obedience, and so are the people he has put to work to go do all this work to move all this stuff. It doesn't mean he personally is moving; it means he's having it done. Now we're going to continue on in Leviticus chapter 14 by looking at verses 42-44. They shall take out their stones and put them in the place of those stones. You shall take other mortar and shall place to the house. If the plague come again and break out in the house, and he's taken away the stones after he's scraped the house and after it's been plastered, then the priest shall come again and behold, the plague is spread in the house, and the fraying lepers in the house, it is unclean. Okay, if he already took out everything he could see that was infected, they even scraped every wall, and it comes back, then it's systemic to the house itself somehow. It is so, and the house is so infected, there's no saving it. So we're going to look. So now the house is declared. This is where we get the idea of condemning buildings from. A building may be condemned because it's unsafe to live in. The building is now condemned, and we're going to look at what we do with the condemned building. Leviticus chapter 14. In chapter 14, we continue. Verses 45-48. You shall break down the house, the stones of it, and the timber thereof, and all the mortar of the house. You shall carry them forth out of the house into an unclean place. Moreover, he that goes in the house and all while is shut up shall be unclean into the evening. He that lies in the house shall wash his clothes, and he that eats in the house shall wash his clothes. Now the priest come and look upon, and behold, the plague has not spread in the house, as the house was plastered. And the priest shall pronounce the house clean, because the plague is healed. Okay, notice we got this other W now, washing. It's been mentioned several times. And as we'll see in a future lesson, it can even apply to washing your hands. So we have the 3 W's here: wear a mask, watch your distance, wash, particularly your hands, but your clothing as well. Have practice good hygiene. Where have we heard those 3 W's before? Oh yeah, signs all over the U.S. telling you to do that during COVID. It's part of how you handle a plague. And to rebel against those instructions, you're not just rebelling against the instructions of the government, you're rebelling against the instructions of God Almighty himself. He's the one that they got the ideal from, whether they're smart enough to know it or not. Okay, it's his ideal first. But now I want you to notice how all these things have been voluntary. People can obey God's commandment or not. And why would they might be afraid to obey his commandment? Well, let's just think about this a minute. Remember those guys? Some of them were. I think in the worst case, one of them was quarantined 3 weeks. They just shut up in their houses or tents or whatever. They can't, unless they got some kind of job like I do, where you can work from your home. They can't. They are not earning money during that entire time. And let's say they're a farmer. Some crops, by the time all this is over, their crop is gone. They weren't able to harvest it, and that's how they make their money. If they live, if particularly they live a ways away, it took them like 3 days each way to get there. They've lost 4 weeks of labor. You got the problem, the fact that maybe just one garment, but all their garments were pretty much infected, and they had to get rid of all of them. Now you got a guy who's homeless. His house has been destroyed. So for people to have confidence, so part of dealing with the plague is you got to make sure it's got to be voluntary, and that requires something of the rest of the community. Because as I mentioned before, when it says God put the plague in the house, he's testing it's not necessarily he's judging the guy who put the plague. When he put the plague in the house, he's also testing the community, see if they'll do what he says or not, to see how they'll respond. I mean, he knows, of course, but now they're gonna see themselves as they really are by their response. And we're gonna look at we're gonna look at some more instructions. That's what in the Torah, some more of his commandments about dealing with a plague that handle this, so these people can do these things, so the plague doesn't spread throughout the community because of fear, because people are afraid to show up and do what they need to do and get tested, and so on and so forth, because they got to eat and they have somewhere to live. But God had a solution for that, and there's what he commanded. In Leviticus 25, 35 through 37. And if your brother be waxen poor or fall in decay with you, then you shall relieve him. Yea, though he be a stranger or a sojourner, that he may live with you. Take you no user of him or increase, but fear God, that your brother may live with you. You shall not give him your money upon usury, nor lend him your victuals for increase. People are like, well, that's too bad, so sad for them. It's not, not my problem. Yes, it is. The attitude of I don't owe it to him is wrong. If you're in God's family, he gave you everything. You owe it to him, and he wants you to take care of it. And he wants to take care of the other people in the family. And notice, even a stranger, we talked again, a stranger means someone of another ethnic group. Here in America, that might be someone from India or Mexico or something, depending on what, where you live at. Whatever your ethnic group is, if they're in a different ethnic group, it's the same thing. And a sojourner is someone who's there temporarily, like perhaps a refugee. Perhaps they fled from another country, and their intention and hope is to go back to that country. and we're to take care of them. And notice, we're to give them interest-free loans to help them get back on their feet. And not just that, in the short run, we'll look at some more details, but about the short run here in a minute. But we're to give them loans so they can rebuild their house, redo these things, and we're not to charge them interest, and we're not to try to make a profit off of them. To take advantage of their desperate situation, so we can get their property and their urban property, for say it's in a high cost area like Malibu in California, beach or somewhere like that, and get their property at a cheap price so we can flip that house, put a new house there and make a profit ourselves. No, we're to restore them. And if people know they're going to be restored, then they're not going to be afraid to come forward, and this plague's not going to spread and make everyone else sick and kill a bunch of people. God's plans work. This is part of how you deal with a plague. We're going to continue on. We're looking at Isaiah for some more details. It's going to give us some more insight to the right way to handle it. Isaiah 58, verses 7 through 10. Is it not to deal your bread to the hungry, and that you bring the poor that are cast out to your house? When you see the naked, that you cover him, and that you hide not yourself from your own flesh. Then shall your light break forth as the morning, your health shall spring forth speedily, and your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your reward. Then you shall call, and the Lord shall answer. You shall cry, and he will say, here I am. If you take away the midst of you from the yoke, and putting forth the finger and speaking vanity, and if you draw out your soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul, then your light shall rise in obscurity, and your darkness shall be as the noonday. Look, you're not just to give them a loan as if to take care of you're to take care of the short-term program too. What? You feed them until they get back on their feet again. They come and live in your house. There's no reason when people are doing. Now, this isn't talking about someone's lazy and drunkard. It's talking about someone who said this series of unfortunate events occur to them. Okay, you're to put them in your house. Or if they got to be outside the camp, you make sure they got something to live in outside the camp, and you cover them up. They're short on clothing, you give them clothing, and you don't hide yourself from them. Act like you didn't see their problem, and it's not your problem, because it is. But if you'll do these things that God says, and you will take care of them, notice what he promises. Your own health will be good. It's going to spread. You're going to be your righteousness. You're doing what's right in the sight of God is going to be before you. He's going to see it, and the glory of the Lord is going to be a reward. The glory of the Lord that appears at the end of the age, in the days to come. You're going to live in his kingdom. You're going to be in his presence. But even beyond all that, right now, when you call on him in your day of distress, he's going to answer. He has answered for me so many times and shown himself strong. But it wasn't. He doesn't pick people nilly-willy to do that with. He says, if you do this, I'll do that. And he's a man. He's a God of his word. And notice it, you shall cry and you shall say, here I am. And that's interesting, because that here I am expression is usually used to people saying to the Lord. And he says, I need someone to do something. They saying, here I am, like they're like, here I am. Your servant is listening. And he's got that same kind of thing towards you if you will take care of these people. So if we will do these things, take care of both their short-term and long-term needs, so they can be restored, then they're not going to be afraid to be tested, because even if they lose all their wealth, they lose all these things, they're going to be taken care of and restored and helped to get back on their feet. So they're going to be willing to do this, and that makes it easier to take care of a plague, to keep from spreading. The question is, will will we put this into action or not? Is a question. That's the test that God might give by putting a plague in somebody's house to see how their neighbors would respond as well as them. Would they obey him or not? Now we're going to look at Yeshua, Jesus, Yeshua, if you prefer to use the Aramaic, and see how he responded, or Isis, if you prefer to use Greek. And when he come down from the mountain, this is really how he dealt with a plague. Matthew 8, chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. And he was come down from the mountain, great multitudes followed him. And behold, there came a leopard and washed him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. And Jesus put forth his hand and touched him, saying, I will be you clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. So I want you to know, first of all, there's a multitude following him. So a lot of people are seeing this happening, okay? The leopard, we talked to him before, he isn't certain about his Lord's will, but it is Lord's will. Remember, sickness ultimately comes not necessarily because of your own, but because of somebody somewhere's, sin. I mean, Satan's involved, the author of sickness at the end. And the path to healing is repentance if you did something wrong, and forgiveness. Well, if you've done that, then it's God's will to heal you. So look what Jesus did. He touched him, which made himself unclean, because the leper's unclean. But when he touched him, the leprosy was cleansed. Jesus didn't catch it. It left the leopard as well. Now here's the point to this. Jesus wasn't just giving this guy a hug to make him feel well. He was touching him to heal him. And our medical professionals have to touch these people who have a plague in the same way. Not, again, to give them a hug, there, it'll all be okay. No, because they're trying to heal them, okay? And sometimes you have to make yourself unclean to take care of other people. As I talked about last week with unclean. And it doesn't mean you've sinned, because Yeshua didn't, or anything like that. But it does mean you can't go, you get clean. After you become unclean, you have to get cleaned yourself before you can press on to deeper, getting close to deeper into the presence of God. Let's just say it that way, because he's everywhere. When you get to these places like inside the temples, you get close to the Holy of Holies, you're deeper in his presence. So, and Jesus, Yeshua, was led by the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, okay, when he touched him. The Holy Spirit healed is what. If you're not led by the Holy Spirit, and you're not a religious professional, don't be touching them, okay? It worked out because he was led by the Spirit, and the Spirit clean the guy. Again, I want to stress though, he's not giving this guy a hug. I've heard people use this to say, you talk about leprosy, about AIDS, he touched the leopard. He healed the leopard. Okay. Yes, we should be out in the business of healing those with AIDS or whatever. That's another plague, by the way. The flu or whatever. But we're not touching them just to make them feel better, emotionally feel better. And we're looking at one more examination of Yeshua, Jesus, what he said about how to handle this plague and how he demonstrated everything we've read. Okay, how he demonstrated everything we've read in Luke 10, 27 through 31. And he answering said, "You shall love your neighbor with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, neighbor as yourself. He said to him, "You have answered right. This do, and you shall live." But he, willing to justify himself, said to Jesus, Who is my neighbor? Jesus answering said, "A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, fell among thieves, and stripped him of his raiment, wounded him, departed, leaving him half dead. And by chance there came down a certain priest that way. He saw him, and he passed by on the other side." Okay, so this guy who starts off here is a lawyer, all right? And he quotes Jesus, the law, correctly. Law meaning God's law, the Torah. But like lawyers often do, now mind you, not all lawyers help you with legal problems. You know, someone's suing you and trying to unjustly take money from you, you need a lawyer, and that's a good thing. But some lawyers, some lawyers will twist words, and this is one of those guys, okay? So he's trying to get a legal definition of neighbor so he can reduce his own responsibility as far as possible and still be, technically inside the law, okay? So Jesus starts answering his question here. And notice this poor guy, this certain man. Now, this certain man is implied to be Jewish, as we see here, okay? But is implied to be Jewish. And notice what happened to this guy. He's lost his clothing. He's lost his wealth. And he's wounded. I mean, he's wounded and half dead. Like that happens to people with a plague. We saw they can lose their clothing and and all their wealth and their housing, and end up very sick, right? And notice what happens. The first one that comes upon him is a priest. That's why people are supposed to be, pronounce them clean or unclean and whatever, and so and teach people the right way to. And their main job, believe it or not, in the lessons, all the rituals and all that stuff, is to teach people to follow God's law correctly. Well, what's this priest do? He looks the other way. He walks by as if he didn't see the guy's plight. Well, we just saw that is contrary to what the Torah says to do. It's contrary to in Isaiah, you're not to avert your eyes. Okay. Now let's continue on and see, because Jesus' point is what this guy should be doing. Let's continue on and look in Luke chapter 10 and verses 32 through 37. And likewise, a Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked upon him and passed on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was when he saw him, had compassion on him, and went and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, sent him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn and took care of him. On the morrow when he departed, he took out 2 pence and gave them to the host, said to him, take care of him. Whatsoever you spend more, when I come, I'll repay you. Now of these three, which now these three thinks was a neighbor to him that fell among the thieves? And he said, he had shown mercy on him. Then Jesus said to them, go and do you likewise. Now, notice the next one's a Levite. Now, again, this is another religious professional, okay? And, in the context of some people, the priest might be like the head pastor in your local church. And this guy's like, the Levite's like some kind of guy that helps, who's on the staff, okay? Perhaps there's something else. Levites were Levitical singers. Perhaps he's one of. And remember, Leviticus, the book we've been reading most of the time, is named that because of the Levites. All right, he's a trained religious professional as well, a trained professional in the context of a doctor. The first priest might be like the doctor, and the Levite might be like a nurse or physician's assistant or something, right? So he knows what to do. All right, and what does he do? He doesn't do a thing. He passes on the other side, gets as far away from that guy as he can. He says, well, man, he's in bad shape. I don't want that to happen to me, and gets as far away from him as he can and averts his eyes. But notice remember the rule is, even if it's a stranger, the Samaritan is a stranger. The Samaritan, this Jewish guy, is a stranger. This is part of Yeshua's point. The Samaritans, Jesus said, worshiped God, but they know what they were doing. The salvation was of the Jews. God gave the Jews the Torah, who were supposed to teach to the Gentiles, but they had not taught the Samaritans correctly. And the Samaritans have everything all messed up. They're worshiping the right God in the wrong way, okay? Which, that could be a whole lesson all by itself. But anyways, but nonetheless, the Samaritan, and for some people who are all like meeting on the Sabbath and messing up, this be like that guy who's still meeting on Sunday and stuff, okay? But what's the important thing here is he had compassion on him. He didn't just keep in the law because the law said to him. He's like, oh, I gotta keep the law. No, he saw that man and had compassion. And notice what he did. He gets down dirty with the guy. He goes down there. He takes care of the guy as best he can himself first. And notice he sets him on his own beast. He was perhaps riding on this animal before. Obviously, it wasn't loaded down with something, or if it was, he had to take it off and put it down so he could put the man on there. And he walks and takes him to the place where he can get some shelter and care. And he pays the man out of his own money. And this, and 2 pence means a day. A pence is old English measure, but it was a day's wages. Okay. And he gave the man, he paid the host and said, when I come back, if there's more, I'll repay you. He's making sure that guy has food, clothing, and shelter. This is what Al Yeshua said for us to do with someone that's become a victim of a plague. We are to heal them. We are to do what we can to kill them. And we're also to take care of them afterwards. And notice, the one who's the neighbor is the one that had mercy on him. They don't care. It doesn't matter this guy was a foreigner. Doesn't matter he was worshiping God, the right God in the wrong way. The priests and the Levite were, as far as rituals and stuff, we're doing the right way. They, at least, those kind of things. They were meeting on the Sabbath. They were meeting. They were congregating like they're supposed to. They were doing all the rituals God commanded. But they didn't have compassion. And the one who gets commended is the one with the compassion. I've said this before, and this Samaritan is a good case of this, a good case of proving my point. You are better off to meet on Sunday and keep those holidays like Christmas and Easter and eat unclean food than to meet on the Sabbath, meet on the Sabbath, keep only the holidays that are given in the Bible, and eat only clean food if you don't have compassion. The guy who does those other things with compassion is better off. That one on Sunday who takes care of people. God wants us to do both. Do not get me wrong. He wants us to meet on the right way and do things and do things and worship him in the way that he told us to in Leviticus and stuff. But it's not an excuse to turn our eyes from people in trouble. And you're better off to have all that stuff wrong and do this one thing right, to love your neighbor in a practical way, not just your words, not looking for a way to get as minimal as possible and say, well, okay, he's not my brother, he's not one of us, he's one of them. No. If you want to obey the commandments of the Father, the commandments of the Torah, and in dealing with a plague, you do all those things we talked about, and particularly this thing about taking care of those who have, doing what you can to help those who have fallen victims of the plague. Those are the instructions of Yeshua. It's about how to deal with the plague, and that is what we need to be doing. Until next week, shalom.